All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're exploring surviving on the edge of nature, from predators to oceans. We're really getting into how humanity navigates those incredibly dangerous, overlapping boundaries of the natural world. We're going to break down the data, the science, and the stark realities of what it literally means to survive on the very edge of nature.
So, what actually happens when human habitats collide with nature's fiercest forces? It's really not just some thing of the past. It is an active, constantly evolving challenge for us right now. In this explainer, we're going to start with a highly visceral biological threat, and then we'll zoom all the way out to a massive systemic environmental shift. To really anchor this journey, we'll be focusing heavily on the continent of Africa, where both of these extreme forces are currently on a direct collision course with growing human populations. Section 1. Nature's deadliest predators. First up, we're looking at the intense, localized danger that pops up when people live right alongside apex predators. We're talking about animals that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. When you break down the numbers, it is genuinely eye-opening. The Nile crocodile has a staggering 63% fatality rate in attacks. If you compare that to the 50% rate of the notorious saltwater crocodile or the 45% of the mugger crocodile, it becomes crystal clear that the Nile crocodile is arguably the most prolific wild predator of humans on the entire planet. The statistics here are just incredibly sobering. But why is that fatality rate so astronomically high? Well, it's not just about the animal's biology. It's really about geography and habitat. Because these crocodiles live woven into the very waterways that communities rely on every single day for washing clothes, fishing, fetching water, the contact is incredibly frequent. These encounters lead to hundreds and quite possibly thousands of fatalities annually. That is more than all other crocodilian species combined. It's just a daily reality for so many communities in sub-Saharan Africa. Section 2. Tracking crocodile conflicts. Okay, so how do we actually mitigate this kind of primal threat? When a predator shares the exact same water that people need to survive, researchers really have to lean on rigorous data and tracking to save lives. Enter CrocAttack. This is a specialized online crowdsourced database originally founded back in 2013 as CrocBite. What makes this tool so absolutely vital is its strict focus on authentic human-wildlife conflict. It deliberately ignores captive or occupational incidents in zoos. So if a professional handler gets bitten, it isn't tracked here, because that's an occupational hazard, right? Not a natural public safety threat. Since it was established in 2013, they've recorded over 8,500 incidents to map out these danger zones. Before tools like this came along, a lot of Nile crocodile attacks went completely underreported, usually only known at a very local level. By pinpointing this data, even distinguishing between the true Nile crocodile and the West African crocodile species, conservation managers can go into vulnerable communities across Africa and Australia and actually educate people on how to safely navigate these shared habitats. It's a total game changer. Section 3. Famous encounters and survivors. Because, let's be honest, data points on a map only tell half the story. To truly grasp the scale of the danger, we have to look at the stories of the people who actually face these apex predators head-on. This history of encounters builds a really intense picture of human resilience. It ranges from an absolute wartime tragedy in 1945 at the Battle of Ramree Island, where retreating soldiers faced saltwater crocodiles in mangrove swamps, all the way to Gustave, a massive Nile crocodile in Burundi that notoriously evaded a giant bear trap in 2002. Then there's Lo Long, a 20-foot giant captured in 2011. Wrestling a 20-foot crocodile is for sure not on my bucket list. And just recently, in 2025, we saw a miraculous story of a man surviving an attack by a 15-foot croc in the Philippines. It just goes to show that our collision with these predators spans both generations and continents. But while crocodiles represent a very primal, immediate danger to individuals, what we call a true micro-threat, the African continent is currently facing an encroaching macro threat of an entirely different scale. We are moving from the localized danger of a river predator to a sweeping systemic environmental change. Section 4. Africa's rising sea levels. This takes us from the rivers where crocodiles hunt straight to the massive oceans bordering Africa's 18,950-mile coastline. The threat here isn't biological, it's hydrological, and it is accelerating fast. 200 million. Let that number just sink in for a second. That is the number of coastal residents in cities like Lagos and Dar es Salaam who are currently at risk from rising seas. When we talk about macro threats, we are talking about entire metropolises facing the very real prospect of inundation.
The numbers driving this are honestly shocking. For much of the late 20th and early 21st century, the baseline rate of sea level rise was 2.7 millimeters per year. After 2009, that nearly doubled to 4.7 millimeters. But recently, the 2023 to 2024 El Niño weather pattern triggered an absolutely massive localized spike of 27 millimeters. To put that into perspective, that's exactly a tenfold jump from the old baseline. It is an astonishing surge.
So why did this happen? It's basically a compounding effect. When a short-term weather anomaly like El Niño teams up with long-term ocean warming, which actually accounted for over 70% of that localized increase, the impact on Africa's low-lying deltas is just staggering. It drove a 73% surge in African sea levels, representing nearly a fifth of the total global increase observed over a 32-year satellite record, and that all happened in a condensed 2-year window. Researchers are pretty blunt about this reality. The oceans surrounding the African continent are warming and rising faster than the global average. With 38 African coastal countries relying heavily on the ocean for economic stability and food security, this isn't just some abstract environmental issue to monitor from afar. It is a sheer survival issue happening right now. Section 5. Adapting to nature's threats. Look, whether we're facing the snapping jaws of a 15-foot crocodile or the creeping, relentless tide of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, humanity's response requires highly unified and strategic action. Our blueprint for coexistence really boils down to 3 main steps. First, track and monitor the data. That means using things like Croc Attack for predator conflict zones or using satellites to map ocean heat and sea level spikes. Second, build physical mitigation, enclosures to keep predators out, and seawalls to hold the oceans back. But step 3 is perhaps the most humbling of all, managed retreat. Sometimes the data tells us that we simply have to back away from drowning coastlines and shrinking habitats. Our survival entirely depends on adapting to what the evidence shows us. So as we continue to collide with the uncompromising forces of nature, from the predators in the rivers to the rising tides of the oceans, I'll leave you with this ultimate question. As our habitats shrink, are we prepared to manage our retreat and coexist, or will we be caught in the surge?